evaporates more in those places. That creates, because of this natural cycle of water vapor, bigger rains somewhere else. So as the climate changes, you can get drier areas because arid areas become less, even drier because they evaporate more, they're getting hotter, and other areas become rainier because there's more water vapor in the air. So in that sense, I mean, for me, that helps me think in terms of common sense that a climate change can have different effects. Even if the overall tendency is to get warmer, it can have different effects in different parts of the world. And as you mentioned, as you were hinting, there are political reasons. I think the term global warming is associated with Al Gore, and a lot of people love Al Gore, and a lot of people don't love Al Gore. So calling it climate change sort of neutralizes that and hopefully allows us to talk about the issues in terms of how it affects people, how it will affect our economy, and what can we do about it. So I think Cameron's presentation that we just saw is very clear in setting out the evidence of what's happening and talking about, through his work with the Governor's Task Force, what we as a state can do about this in ways that address the issue, address how it affects people, and builds our economy in a more sustainable way. That's what they're thinking about in that task force.
We ought to talk about this task force and a little more optimistic outlook. But let me mention one thing that I'm aware of, too. You mentioned warmer, drier areas getting warmer and some areas getting wetter. But, I mean, I know enough of this. There will be some areas that get cooler.
Sure.
Because of a disruption of like the Gulf Stream. Now, one thing that warms the Northeast, and particularly Europe, is our Gulf Stream, which is a warm weather generator coming out of the Gulf, and it swings all the way up, and there's a Labrador current that comes off the Arctic. Well, with global warming and Arctic melting, which is fresh, cold water, it displaces the Gulf Stream. And it's very conceivable with global warming that the Northeast, or portions of the Northeast at times, and in Europe, could see cooling because of this displacement of the warm weather generator.
Northern Europe could get an ice age out of global warming. And that's why calling it global warming is really a little bit simplistic, because it's the change of our climate, and it can be a fairly abrupt change. Now, again, I'm not an expert, but if the Gulf Stream is disrupted, I mean, imagine what that does to Northern Europe and even to our Atlantic states here in the Northeast.
Now, Mark mentioned earlier the disruption of, like in New Hampshire, we could have a disruption of skiing. We could have a disruption of maple syrup and that stuff.
Foliage.
Foliage. And if you're a farmer, I mean, farmers, there are people who grow stuff in New Hampshire. And if you have a disruption of climate, I mean, it could really hurt just like food generation. So the bottom line is we don't really know for sure how climate change affects the whole darn planet. This is a pretty serious subject.
It is. And many people are very vulnerable, not just the economics of our state, but people who live in places which are subject to flooding.
Now, bringing it back to our state and the impact on our state, positive and negative, I mean, we do, in fact, our governor has a climate change task force looking at this. I mean, can you say something about that?
I'd love to, Ivan. It's a very impressive group of people, and I've been fortunate to attend 3 or 4 of their meetings over the last few months. And you have, Governor Lynch has set up, under the leadership of the Commissioner of Environmental Services, he's set up, I would guess there's 15 members. Representatives from business, from both sides of the aisle, in the State House, in the State Senate and the House of Representatives, the General Court, business people, scientists. Cameron Wake is there, representatives of wildlife organizations, nonprofits such as mine, and city planner, the town planner from Keene is there, and as I've been able to plug into this, they have been looking methodically, seriously, scientifically, with good economics on what can New Hampshire do, what can the governor do, what can we do with policies, what can we do with laws and regulations in the state to not only deal with climate change and reduce our carbon dioxide emissions in the state, but do it in a way that makes sense economically.
Yeah.
And we've seen that in Cameron's presentation, the range of options that the task force is considering with very good scientific and economic analysis. What can we do which will have an effect on carbon emissions and will pay off, has a strong return on investment. Just insulating our homes and our public buildings has a very fast return on investment. It pays off forever. And not only does it make sense economically, but the money that we don't send overseas for oil will stay in this state.
Yeah.
If we can use some of our forest resources to heat our homes, that money stays here in our state. If it's managed correctly, those forests are managed for hardwood products and for heating purposes. This is just one example of how not only does it make sense environmentally for the climate, it also keeps our money here in our state, employs our people here, and so it's a very impressive process. The part that for my organization that is of particular interest is one of the working groups of this task force is on adaptation, and that's sort of code word. And it's a code word for the fact that some effects of climate change are coming inevitably because of what we've done already.
Yeah.
So we need to learn to adapt to that. We need to understand that floods like the ones we've had here in New Hampshire are going to come more frequently. We need to be ready. We need to understand that sea levels will rise to some extent. It's already built in. It's baked into the cake. Some people are going to be affected by that differently. So how are we going to adapt to that? If our maple syrup industry or our ski industry is going to be affected, how are we going to cushion that in some way? How are we going to understand the varied impact of climate change on people in our state? And so there's a working group thinking about that, and I'm looking forward to getting involved in that one, because to me that's an issue of justice and how we'll take care of those people who are disproportionately affected. So the task force was set up early this year. They're tasked by the governor to bring recommendations to him by the end of the year. Just a couple days ago, there was a meeting in Concord that I attended. Looks like they're on track. They're fine-tuning their recommendations on land use and transportation, on building standards, on what the government can do itself internally, on adaptation. As I said, there are a number of working groups, and they're near the end. So for anybody who's watching this before the end of December, there's still an opportunity. You can go to the DES website.
Yeah, exactly.
And there's a wealth of information there. Really good people in the Environmental Services Department working on this, staffing this under the commissioner. So it's, I'm gushing because they're doing such a good job there. It's very impressive. Now, sort of the glass half empty here is we are the last New England state to develop a climate change action plan. So in a sense, that's good because we've learned from what other people are doing. And for example, it's only the most recent efforts by other states that have had an adaptation plan. And so we're benefiting from that, and I think we're leading. Our state is leading. But it's time. It's time for us to do it.
Well, we have another video clip with Reverend Roberta Finkelstein speaking. Would you like to set that up for us?
Yes. At our forum at UNH on the 28th of October, I don't think people really knew what to expect from Roberta. You had Cameron speaking on science, you had Nancy Hirschberg talking about business aspects, and then you had Stacy Vanderveer talking about national security. So Roberta speaking from a values or from a faith standpoint, I think that the audience really didn't know what to expect, and they were shocked. They were shocked in a good sense. She was, as you all will see, just moving. It was an emotion-laden appeal. And the way she frames it, as our audience will see, is that values voters think about climate change and think about justice. The term values voters in the 80s and 90s has had a certain meaning. And she makes the case that progressive religious communities also are values voters, and they care about justice, and they care about how climate change will affect people differently in our world, in our country, and in our state. So Roberta speaks to that with I think, in a way which left the room electric. So I hope you can perceive some of that electricity.